Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the muscles that are around the shoulders and the upper limbs area. Again, it's telling you muscles that position the pectoral girdle, move the arm, move the elbow joint, all of these sorts of things. Please notice that you have something similar right here in your notes packets, and so that's a resource for helping you to understand these muscles, okay, and what they do. This information is also found in your textbook, so you can check yourself there as well. So to go through some of these muscles, again, make sure that you're always looking for some things that help orient you in the image. Are you looking at things from the front or the back? One thing that might help us in the image that we see here is we can look at the elbow joint, and we can notice that we're actually seeing the olecranon here digging into that olecranon fossa, okay? And so this means that we're looking from the posterior side, okay? So the other thing you could notice is here you see the scapula, and notice here's that medial border and here's the spine of the scapula, so that's definitely going to be from the posterior side, okay? Also notice, just like we talked about before, here on this right side you see a whole lot more bones than you do on the left side. That means this is showing superficial muscles, and then this is showing deep ones that are underneath, and the superficial ones have been pulled away. So we've talked about this one before. This is the trapezius. We see it in the cervical region, but we also see it connecting all the way down to some of these thoracic vertebrae. Another one is going to be that big muscle on the shoulder. You can see it from the back side, but it goes across all the way to the front side as well. That's called the deltoid. And you may remember that bone surface feature called the deltoid tuberosity. Well, this is where the deltoid attaches to the humerus. The other one we have is the latissimus dorsi. Remember, latissimus means wide, and dorsi is very similar to dorsal, which is the back side of the body or the posterior side of the body. So this is literally meaning the wide muscle on the posterior surface, and that's what it is. So it's this very big muscle back here. Now I just want to take a minute. If we pull all of these off and then look in the thoracic region, there's a set of 3 muscles called the erector spinae. And what do you think they do? Well, given the name, they actually are going to be some of the major ones involved in contracting and keeping your spine erect, keeping you sitting or standing upright. And so these are those muscles right there. Okay, to go back to this image, we've already, again, noticed we're looking at the back side because this elbow, we can see the olecranon here. Okay. You can also see the spine of the scapula. We've talked about the superficial muscles, so let's move over here to the deep muscles. Okay, first of all, we did say this is the spine, and if you remember, we had the supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa on the bone. Well, guess what? We have muscles that match those names. Supraspinatus above the spine, infraspinatus below the spine. Okay. Then we're going to have another one here called levator scapulae. Well, what do you think it's going to do? Well, levator means elevate. So this one is actually attached all the way up here, okay, and attached to the medial border of that scapula, and it helps elevate that scapula. We're also going to have the teres major and minor, okay. These are below that infraspinatus muscle. And just like we said, with these major-minor pairs, major is on bottom, it's the bigger one, and minor is on top right here. So one thing that I often do is I look at things according to landmarks. So one of our landmarks is the spine of the scapula. Above it, supraspinatus, below it, infraspinatus, and then keep in mind, below that are the teres muscles, major and minor. Now, here's that medial border of the scapula, okay, and that can be another landmark. And so on the very top surface, we're going to have the levator scapulae. But underneath that, we're going to have the rhomboid muscles. Rhomboid major, the big one on bottom, and rhomboid minor, the smaller one on top. And so those three muscles right here are between the medial border of the scapula and the vertebra. Okay? And so these are muscles near the scapula. These are going to be very important in helping to position and stabilize that scapula so that the arm has something stable that it's attached to so you can start to move that arm. Okay, now let's turn and look at the front side of the body. First of all, how do we know we're looking at the front side of the body? What's our landmark? Well, one big one is you can see the face, and so the face lets you know you're looking at the front side. You can also see the sternum. That also lets you know we're looking at the front side. If we were looking at the back side, instead of seeing the sternum, we would see vertebra. Okay. So some muscles here, just to remind you, sternocleidomastoid attaching to the sternum, the clavicle, and then running back to the mastoid process. Deltoid that we saw before, we said we could see it from the back. It's that big shoulder muscle. You can also see it from the front. Alright, this big one right here underneath the breasts is going to be the pectoralis major. And this is going to be the one exception because pectoralis minor, rather than being above it, is actually underneath it. Notice here's the superficial muscle side, and over here is the deep muscle side. So this muscle right here, it attaches in three different places, but that muscle is pectoralis minor, underneath the major muscle. Okay. The other one we have is serratus anterior. The book doesn't label it very well, but serratus anterior includes each of these muscles going down here. And if you were to draw along the edge of it, it almost looks like the edge of a serrated knife. Okay, so serratus sounds a little bit like serrated, and anterior means that serrated part is on the front side. Okay. Okay, we've gone through those muscles in a different section, and so let me turn now to looking closer at muscles of the upper limb. Okay. Let's orient ourselves to this image once again, looking for landmarks. So we said if we saw the sternum, that meant we're looking at the anterior side. We said if we saw the spine of the scapula, we're looking at the posterior surface, so this surface back here. Okay, so what that means is that this side of the image over here is an anterior view, and this side of this image over here is a posterior view. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Look for those landmarks so you know what view you're looking at. Okay, so some of the muscles that we've already talked about, deltoid, pectoralis major on the anterior surface, and on the posterior surface, that wide muscle on the back side, the latissimus dorsi. Okay, let's start learning some of the muscles of the arm. So the one that's most superficial in the brachial region on the front side is called biceps. It means two heads. Brachii. And brachii sounds an awful lot like brachial, which you should know from chapter 1. The brachial region is this upper arm area. Okay. And we'll come back to brachialis is going to be a deeper muscle that is underneath the biceps brachii. Then we've got the triceps brachii. Triceps means three heads, and brachii again in the brachial region. Okay, so biceps brachii is going to be on the front side. Triceps brachii is the back side of this brachial region. Okay, let's look again at this image. We know the whole image is from the front side because we can see the sternum, we can see the face. Okay, these muscles we learned before, these are superficial. Over here we're seeing more bones, so these are the deep muscles with the superficial ones pulled away. We learned this before, pectoralis minor and serratus anterior. Now we're adding another one, coracobrachialis. What do you think it's referring to? Well, coraco, you may remember, is the coracoid process. That's this little part of bone right up here. Brachialis means brachial region. So it's running from the coracoid process, coracoid process all the way down to the brachial region. So coracobrachialis. Okay, so now we're looking at the hand. Okay, one of your landmarks to think of is to remember the thumb is going to be lateral and the pinky is more medial in anatomical position. The thumb is also near the radius, which a radius is part of a circle, and you can move your thumb in a circle. So the radius bone is near here, and the ulna bone is near the pinky side. Okay. What I do on these images is I look for a landmark muscle. And the one I always look for is the brachioradialis. This is the one that runs from the brachial region down to the radius. And so we can follow it here. Okay. All the muscles, superficial muscles on the anterior side here are going to be flexors. They help flex the wrist and the fingers. And we'll notice in a minute that all the ones on the back side of the brachioradialis, on the posterior surface, are going to be extensors. They help to extend the wrist and the fingers. So let's look here at the flexors. And let's look at the names. The name makes sense. Flexor, carpi, radialis. So flexor says what it does. We know it's on this anterior surface, so as it contracts, it helps to flex the wrist and the fingers. Carpi means carpal, so we know it's running across that carpal region. And radialis means that it's attached to the radial side. Notice that this one is closer to that thumb. The one right next to it, superficial, is palmaris longus. Okay, and so palmaris longus, if you notice, the tendons from that run across the palm. Okay, and so that's how I orient myself to which one is palmaris longus, is because the tendons run across the palm of the hand. Then the one right next door to that that's superficial is flexor, meaning what it does. Carpi, well, it's going to be flexing that wrist region. And ulnaris, so that means it's attaching to the ulnar side, which is near the pinky. Okay. Now you're going to notice that there, around the wrist region, is going to be a connective tissue band that goes across there. And that's called the retinaculum. Okay, and so that's this white band that goes across, kind of helps hold a lot of those tendons in place around the hand. Another one that we're going to notice, here's flexor carpi ulnaris, here's brachioradialis, and squeezed in there is pronator teres. As that contracts, it's going to cause pronation. So where would you guess the supinator was? It turns out it's going to be deep to the brachioradialis, and it's going to run in the opposite direction since it has an opposite action. Okay, let's actually look at the hand, the hand itself. Okay, and here's one, abductor. So as it contracts, it's going to abduct. Pollicus, that's really close to pollex, and brevis. Brevis is very close to the word brief, which means short. And so that's going to be this muscle, this chunky one right here, that helps to abduct the thumb. Okay. On the other side, we're going to have the abductor. Digiti means digit, minimi means little. Well, this is our little digit. And so right here, this chunky one, abductor digiti minimi, helps to abduct that pinky finger. In between, you're going to see these hand muscles, okay, and those are called lumbricals. One of my students actually came up with the way that she remembered it and shared it with me. So lumbricals, the word sounds a lot like lumberjack, and I think of those Canadian guys in the plaid shirts, cutting down trees all day with an axe, lumberjacks, okay? Well, lumberjacks are going to have large lumber coals because they're hefting that axe all day. Okay, so that's one way that one of my students shared that she remembered it, and I thought it was good. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the posterior view. And again, let's look for our landmark muscle. This is the brachio. It starts in that brachial region, running down radialis. So all of the muscles on this side are going to be extensor muscles. So first we're going to have right next door extensor carpi, so it's extending the wrist. Radialis, we know it's on the radial side, so it's near the thumb. Longus. Now right next to it, we're going to have the extensor carpi radialis brevis. Okay. Now what this is referring to, the word longus means long, brevis means brief or short. It's referring to the length of the tendon. So notice that the extensor carpi radialis longus, this tendon starts really high up. So the tendon's very long. The extensor carpi radialis brevis, notice the tendon is not quite as long here. Okay. Now right next door to the extensor carpi radialis brevis is going to be the extensor digitorum. And notice its tendons also go across all of the digits, so it's extending the digits. Now next door to that, superficial, is the extensor carpi ulnaris. Okay, and this muscle goes down, it's extending the wrist, and it attaches over on the ulnar side. Okay. One last muscle here on the anconeus muscle. That's near the elbow region. It's this short little muscle in the elbow region. Okay, and so those are some of the muscles of the shoulders and upper limbs. And so again, I would use these images, making sure that you keep in mind which ones are showing superficial and which ones are showing deep images. Also, the more images you can look at and make sense of, the better. So be sure and look in your textbook, be sure and look in your lab manual. You have exercises and your homeworks for both of those. But feel free to go to Google Images and check out some other images and see, can I find these same muscles if I see it in a slightly different way. Also, don't forget, if you have access to Mastering A&P, there's PAL 3.0 on there that can give you some practice with this as well.